Hi, welcome to Pro Shop Talk. I'm Daniel. I'm the technical director here at RW Supply and Design. Today we're going to be talking about recoat systems. Today I get to talk to Dee with Bona. Dee is the training manager for Bona. He's been a contractor before that, and he trains contractors how to use all Bona's products and share his knowledge in the wood flooring sand and finish world. So welcome on board, Dee.
Thanks, Daniel.
Awesome. I'm glad we get to talk about this today. I'm glad you get to answer some of my questions. We're just talking about recoat systems and kind of where they fit in the sand and finish world. I get a lot of questions about recoat systems as guys are going in to restore floors. And so I know you guys with Bona have recoat systems. So real quickly, from the Bona side, what is a recoat system, and when would a contractor use a recoat system?
Yeah, so we actually talk about three different type of recoats, but a recoat system is just, if a floor is in good enough shape to where it doesn't need to be refinished, then there's that opportunity to recoat a floor. Maybe because there's no major dings in it, just some surface scratches, and you're just looking to add another protective layer. So, screen and recoat is kind of an industry standard, but then there's two other systems that we can definitely dive into.
Okay. So what are your other two systems on top of just a classic screen and recoat?
Yeah, so one system is called Bona Prep, and what that is a deep cleaner and a conditioner to help optimize the adhesion of a new coat of finish going down. And then the guaranteed recoat system that we have, it's a little bit more involved process, but it's guaranteed no matter what kind of contaminants may be on that floor. It's guaranteed to remove all those contaminants to assure that you're going to have a successful recoat.
Okay, gotcha. So what kind of a situation would a contractor, or what kind of a floor would a contractor look at going above a screen and recoat, like into the prep and then the guaranteed system? What would be some of the factors they'd see that they'd want to move up from a screen and recoat?
Yeah, so, recoating is a huge risk unless you have that guarantee system. When it comes to screening, you're just pushing stuff around and hoping that, there's no contaminant that's going to become a bond breaker. With prep, it's not a guarantee either, but it'll give you a better chance on having success because of the prep product. It's a deep cleaner and a conditioner, so not only are you going to get that mechanical bond with the abrasion that's involved with the prep process, but you also get a chemical bond because you've now softened that existing finish that will allow that next coat to really be able to grab onto. So we would say you should at least use prep with every recoat that you're going to attempt above, just a screen and recoat, because it's going to give you a better chance of having success. But that guarantee recoat, we would say, if it's one of those jobs where you don't, like a hand scrape, distressed or type of floor where you can't resand that floor unless you're going to re-scrape it or distress it, you definitely would want to consider that guaranteed recoat system so that you won't have a failure.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, let's dig into those two systems. Let's talk about prep first. Seems like every recoat system that I've dealt with is kind of loosely the same steps, which are, do your investigative work and test, clean the floor, apply the adhesion promoter or conditioner, apply the finish on top of that. So is that kind of the same with prep?
It is. So yeah, doing the test is definitely important, and all the test is going to do is let you know whether or not that floor is a good candidate to be recoated. So if your test area fails, then you shouldn't even move forward with trying to do the rest of the floor. Typically there's going to, if there's a contaminant on that floor, that becomes the bond breaker that doesn't allow that coat of finish to stick. And so, with prep, you'll do a test.
How do you do the test specifically?
Yeah. So with the test, you'd want to just focus on a small area and probably an area where you think they may have used some kind of maintenance product that can interfere with adhesion. Like you wouldn't do the test up under a rug or maybe in the closet where they're not really using the maintenance products. But you just, the prep process would be applying the prep to the floor, spray and buffing, that would be like the deep clean part of it. And using a maroon pad is what you'd be using. And then after that, you tack the floor with prep. And what that does is that is putting more prep on the floor, but it's also cleaning any slurry that you may have created from the deep clean. And then, so after you tack with prep, then you would now do the abrasion part, which would be, stacking 2 maroon pads together and really to help conform to the floor in case it has some highs and lows, not necessarily distressed, but just not a flat floor. And then you would vacuum if needed. Typically you won't need to vacuum because it's more of a wet abrasion that you're doing, and because you soften the finish, you're just doing a light etching with that maroon pad because the finish is soft. Then you would tack the floor again with prep. This is just assuring that if there was any fine dust created that you're removing that. And then, give it at least, make sure the prep is dry, because the prep does contain a little bit of solvent. That's what helps soften the finish. Okay. And then you're ready to apply. So, when you're doing that test area, it's just kind of quickly going through that process just to make sure you're cleaning the floor really well. After the finish has had a chance to dry, we typically say maybe wait overnight to come back and use a serrated edge, like a quarter, just to kind of rub that finish to see if it peels off pretty easy. Okay. If it doesn't, then it's at least a good candidate. It was successful in the test area, but that doesn't mean you're not going to have any issues, somewhere else around that floor. Gotcha.
So then, you're running through that whole process on the test. Then you're successful with that. Now you move on to cleaning the whole floor. Walk me through the easiest way for a contractor to clean a whole floor.
Yeah, so depending on the size of the job, like commercial jobs, we would just use like a bucket with a string mop just to kind of get some prep on the floor, but not over flooding the floor. And, it works a lot better when you got 2 guys, because one guy can be putting prep down, the other guys can be buffing right behind them. And as the guy buffs a section, then you have the other guy coming back and just kind of mopping up the prep, I should say, using prep to mop up the floor in case any kind of slurry was created from that deep clean that you're doing. Yeah. One guy can do it by himself too. You're just going to work in smaller sections, because what you don't want to allow to happen is that slurry to start drying up, because at that point it's hard to tack that off with prep. So the first step is just kind of applying prep and buffing it in. Some guys will just, walk around with a spray bottle in the buffer if they can run that buffer with one hand. We know that can be difficult. But anyway, just misting out some prep and buffing it in. Or if it's a bigger job, mopping on the prep and then buffing it in. Gotcha. Then you would tack it off with more prep. We tell guys you probably want to have a gallon bucket of some prep, and then you'd also want to have a rinse bucket. That way, as you're tacking off any slurry that you're creating, if you're using 1 or 2 microfiber cloths, you can wring those out in the clean water and not keep putting that dirty mop head in your clean bucket of prep. Gotcha. And so as you're kind of cleaning up any slurry that was created, then you would come back and now start your abrasion phase. And as I talked about earlier, stacking 2 pads together. If it's a lightly distressed floor, then maybe 3 pads to allow it to conform in some of the low spots. Yeah. And you also want to be careful not to knock off some of the high spots if it's that type of floor. That way you're not getting too aggressive and removing any colors. And that's why also we don't talk about using a screen. If it's a flat floor, you probably could screen in areas where the backslider door, if you notice some more aggressive scratches than a screen, you can lightly screen the floor if you choose to do that. But typically the maroon pad would be enough for your abrasion phase, because the finish has been softened. You're just looking for, it's not the depth of the scratch that you have, but it's having a lot of micro scratches in there, creating that surface area to give you that mechanical bond. And because the finish has been softened, it's also going to give you a chemical bond. Gotcha. And so after that abrasion, if there was any dust that was created, then you could vacuum the floor if you feel you need to. Most guys would just, at that point, tack the floor with using a microfiber cloth and more prep, so that you're applying more prep as well as tacking up any fine dust, so that continues to soften the finish, and then you're ready to apply the finish coats. We really lean on using a 2-component water-based product because it has better adhesion properties versus just a single component. But you could use, Mega or even oil for that matter if you're just recoating with oil. But like I say, a 2-component water-based product gives you better a chance of having success, even though you're not guaranteeing a prep and recoat, at least you give yourself a better chance by using a 2-component.
Gotcha. Okay. And then that final buff with multiple maroon pads, that's a dry buff, right?
Yes, no more prep is being applied because you apply prep several times with the tacking and the spraying and then tacking again. So yeah, it's just a dry buff.
And how much mileage are you getting out of a side of a maroon pad, roughly?
Yeah, man, that's tough. I always tell, most contractors, they go by feel. If they see they're not really dulling that sheen up, and sometimes it's a feel where it's just gliding across the floor versus you can feel just a little bit of a grab. So yeah, it's really hard to put a square footage number on that pad. It's more of, you can tell it's just gliding at this point and not really, cutting in a little.
Gotcha. So that's the prep system. Now if a guy wants to move to like guaranteed and get the gold standard, what's your guaranteed system look like?
Yeah, so the guaranteed system, it's a prep type product. We call it the Bona remover, or even like the super prep is what some people refer to it as. But what that is you'd want to clean the floor first, just to clean up any debris, just a slight tacking or a wet mop, clean the floor, just, whether it be with the Bona deep clean. Some guys might run the power scrubber over the floor just to get the floor clean. So once the floor is clean, now you want to work, we say about 200 square foot at a time. And the reason for that is because that Bona remover, the longer that sits on the floor and dries up, it's harder to get that up with the rinse. But just quickly to go through the process. So you roll out the Bona remover using one of the Bona candy stripe rollers or just a 3/4 of an inch nap roller. Roll out the remover, and then you would buff it in using, there's a special drive plate similar to a Tampico brush, but it's called the Bona abrasive brush. And that brush has grit on each of the fingers to really help scrub the floor. And even the Bona remover has grit in it as well. So you're kind of buffing that remover in with that abrasive brush, and that's how you would treat the field. For around the perimeter, you would take either 120 grit paper, on, whether by hand or on a block, or even a maroon pad, and just really scrub around the perimeter. So once you've done that 200 square foot section and the perimeter, now you would want to use the Bona power scrubber, and it's a must that you have the Bona power scrubber. Most guys say, does any power scrubber work? We can only guarantee it with our power scrubber. I mean, we have the 2 squeegees, and you use the red brushes, which are more aggressive. That's also giving you some abrasive action to picking up that Bona remover before you move on to the next section.
Gotcha.
So, so once you do one section, you have to do that twice, but you don't have to do the perimeter twice by hand. But you have to do so you rinse it, you take it as the Bona rinse 1-to-4 mix to take the remover off, and then you would do a second application, take the remover off, move on to your next section, or you do a section at a time once, then you go back and do that twice, and then you would deep clean the whole floor just to make sure there's no grit left on the floor as you're preparing before you put down your finish coat.
Gotcha. Okay. So it sounds like the difference between, prep and guaranteed is significant in terms of labor hours. So if you were walking in on a job and you were trying to decide between those two systems, what are some of the factors you consider?
One is really just talking to the customer about, what type of maintenance products they use. If they're like new to owning this house and they don't know what's been used on there, it's really about educating that homeowner on, one, what the cost difference is between the two, and that one system is not a guarantee. So if there was any adhesion issues after doing the prep system, then the only way you can fix that would be doing a resand. And so, but if they say we want a guarantee and they're okay with paying the price, so that's one way I would look at it is, based on if there's a budget involved, but making sure they understand the differences between the two. Most guys working in a higher end home, or if it's a home that they just don't want to have to resand, then they're really going to be pushing that guaranteed recoat system. That way they know that they're not going to have, and when I say they're not going to have any issues, as long as they do the process, they shouldn't have any failures. So that would be kind of my, the way I would look at, I've done, out of 100 recoats that I've done in my contracting days, 2 have failed, but it's only because there was something on that floor that didn't allow the finish to stick. So, I mean, screening recoat's good, but I would use a prep on every job. And if it's a job that smaller room, if I had to resand it, but I'm not going to resand it on my own dime. I mean, hopefully I'm educating that customer that, you know, it may, I mean, if it fails, that's what's going to happen. And I don't mind sanding a square room versus, you know, a higher end home with multiple rooms, and it can just take me a lot longer. So those are some of the factors I would use to determine, or at least let the customers choose, not me determining what's good for them, but letting them choose. Do you want the guarantee, or are you willing to, you know, take the risk on me using this prep and recoat, which has a 80% success rate, at least in my experience, but you know, it's not a guarantee.
Gotcha. Okay. You know, if I'm walking in on a job and I'm doing my investigative work, what are some of the maintenance products or things that have been done to the floor that should send up a red flag? Like, what are words that I would hear, products that people use that are going to contaminate or influence that bond?
Yeah, you know, typically it's overspray of furniture polish, maybe cabinet cleaners, window cleaners that have oversprayed. Different type of oil soaps, anything that's leaving something on your floors. Like, we pride ourselves on our cleaners not leaving anything. I mean, it's just, you know, it cleans the floor, it maintains whatever shine you have, it doesn't make your floor shinier. But if they're using any maintenance products that makes the floor shinier, then it's leaving something on the floor. Therefore, that can become the bond breaker. Definitely if they ever wax their floors, you know that there's just no way you can do anything with that. But the guarantee recoat system will remove wax. So
Gotcha.
It's just kind of, you know, whether you're looking up under their counter or they're being honest with you on, hey, all we've ever used was, you know, even vinegar and water, probably won't interfere with a recoat. It just kind of starts to eat away at the finish. But mainly just anything being left on the floor is what's key to kind of try to figure out. Is there anything on that floor other than that urethane?
If you're looking at a floor and you're about to try to restore it and recoat it, what repairs do you need to make beforehand before you start that repair process?
Yeah, any major dings that are in the floor, I mean, you know, you want to point that out to the homeowner, that a recoat is not designed to fix any, you know, really deep gouges into the wood. You know, you would want to do a board replacement at that point. But man, when you do that, now you got to sand that board, build that back up. But it's important for the homeowners to understand a recoat is just adding another protective layer of finish. It's not really designed to fix any imperfections in the board themselves. Surface scratches, yeah, it'll do a good job of, you know, helping to cover up a surface scratch, but any, you know, really deep scratches that are in the wood, I mean, they may need to, you know, whether it's highlighting it with some kind of color, if they're okay with that. It's really, my thought is, educate the homeowner as much as you can on what this recoat's going to do for them versus, and point out what it's not going to do if you notice any things as a contractor as you're walking the floor that, you know, it won't fix certain things that they may see.
So it sounds like probably when you get into like exposure of the raw wood, either a scratch has gone through the finish into the raw wood or finish has worn down to the raw wood, you know, you're not going to get a color restoration of that. You're just going to get a even sheen over the top of that. Right,
and even the sheen may not be that even, depending on how much finish may be missing. I mean, if they've worn off that finish that much to where it's down the raw wood, and you put another coat of finish on there, like you say, they're not going to have that color, as much color as they would on the rest of the floor that has, you know, more of a build on there that has protected that, because some of that color may have been walked off just because that much finish is gone.
Gotcha. Okay. So my favorite question is, contractors always find new and creative ways to mess things up. I know I have.
Yeah.
So what are the easiest pitfalls for somebody to avoid if they're using your recoat system? Like, what are the easiest ways they're going to accidentally mess it up?
Just shortcutting the system. I mean, you definitely have to make sure you're thorough in everything that you do. I mean, don't, you know, like some of the shortcuts is not working the perimeter of the room, even though you may feel that there's not that much maintenance products, you know, around the perimeter. I mean, you want to treat the whole job like you would, like you do the center of the floor, do the perimeter just as good. With prep, jumping on it too soon, meaning, if it still looks like it's wet because you really put a lot of prep on that floor, because it contains a solvent, if you start coating that floor, it could start fish-eyeing because that solvent is going to cause that water base to want to separate. So just, following the drying times. With the guarantee recoat system, man, probably just not doing it twice is one of the biggest, guys will think, oh, one time was good enough. But you really want to make sure you're thoroughly completing that process. And one thing that we probably don't mention on instructions is that if the floor continues to foam up on you when you're putting that remover down, you may need to do it a third time. It's letting you know that it's still trying to work against some contaminant that's on that floor. Normally by that second application of remover, it tends not to foam up as much on you, which lets you know, the floor has done a good job of, you've cleaned off those contaminants to where, you're good to go. Some guys do nothing around the perimeter with the guaranteed recoat system, so you get peeling happening around the perimeter room, and there's a definite stop point where it just won't peel anymore. That kind of lets you know nothing was done around that perimeter. So,
okay.
But yeah, just kind of following the instructions. I mean, which, it's one of our commandments, read the instructions, but whether or not they do that.
Yeah.
Some guys figure, oh, I know what I'm doing, so.
That's an uphill battle sometimes.
Indeed.
So, well, Dee, I appreciate it. Thanks for helping answer some of my questions, especially around your system. And I know there are a lot of steps that I didn't realize that that were super educational for me. So,
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah.